inside our minds is beautiful and vibrant. We're not the problem. No! Society is, so throw our own party. You're only invited if brain diversity is something you find exciting. 3 cheers to neurodivergency. Raise your cups. Hey! Positivity is non-toxic, so drink up. Here at the Brainbow Connection. Brainbow Connection.
Hello, you beautiful people, and welcome to Brainbow Connection, your source for non-toxic positivity for neurodivergent brains and those who love them. I am Andrea, and today we've got a solo episode where I'm going to be talking all about ADHD, because that is my main neurodivergent condition that I am dealing with. So I just wanted to dive into my experience with ADHD, typical symptoms of ADHD, and I also want to talk about stimulants like Adderall and Ritalin, because they have a lot of impact on people who take them, positive and negative, and anybody who's on stimulants has probably been having a pretty hard time lately because there have been national shortages, all sorts of stuff going on. So let's dive right into it. ADHD, you may know, stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. And this is a really unfortunate name because it makes people think that ADHD is just about not being able to sit still and not being able to focus. It assumes that all of us are really hyper, which is true for some people, but it's not true for everybody. So even though everybody experiences ADHD a little differently, especially between men and women, but even person to person, the experience can be drastically different. There are some hallmarks that tend to be fairly common. So I'm just going to go through some of those so that if you're wondering if you have ADHD, this might give you some fodder to take to your doctor. Because remember, I am not a doctor, not in any way, shape, or form, not even a little bit. So this podcast is not supposed to be medical advice, but it is a great way for you to begin the process of self-identification, which is an awesome first step to getting a formal diagnosis if you want one. People with ADHD, obviously, the first one that comes to mind is inattention. It's hard to focus. It is really easy to get distracted. And this is actually part of the issue with impulse control. So people with ADHD often struggle with impulse control. It's like a dog seeing a squirrel. You are working on something, you're doing great, you're in the zone, and then all of a sudden you have a thought and your brain follows that thought. And before you know it, you have wandered away from your computer, started a whole new project, half-cooked lunch, and you have no idea when the last time you went to the bathroom or had a drink of water was. That is a very typical ADHD experience, and I know that it happens to me a lot. Hyperactivity is also kind of a hallmark of ADHD, but it doesn't always mean physical hyperactivity. So, people might fidget, they might tap, they might talk a lot. I'm a talker. I will talk someone's ear off. I am jiggling my leg right now as I am recording this. I just never really stop moving. And it's not because I have an excess of energy, or at least it doesn't feel like it. I don't feel like an energetic person. I actually kind of feel tired a lot of the time, but I still have these near constant movements of my body, and my brain never really seems to turn off. At least that's what it feels like to me. My brain just always seems to be going a little bit faster than my mouth can handle, so sometimes my words come out jumbled because my brain is just going so fast. And that is something that stimulants can actually help with, but we're going to talk about that later. So like I mentioned, impulsivity is a hard thing for people with ADHD to master. It's all about making hasty decisions without a lot of thought. So this can mean blurting out things that maybe you didn't think through, interrupting people. I am really bad about that one. I interrupt people so bad. It's actually been a problem in some of my personal relationships, but I get so excited that I just can't really hold it in anymore, and the words just come out. It can also give us problems with things like spending. I know that a lot of people with ADHD struggle with impulsive spending. I know I do. I am a self-proclaimed shopaholic, and it's a real problem. And it really does come from that, lack of impulse control. Forgetfulness is a huge one, and it can be one of the most frustrating parts of having ADHD because people assume that because you forgot, you don't care, or you're disorganized, or you're lazy, but none of those things are true. It's just a symptom of our neurodivergence. And I hear people with ADHD especially all the time say things like, "Oh, I always thought I was lazy. I could never remember anything. I always thought I was disorganized until I realized, oh, I just have ADHD." That's why people with ADHD can really benefit from like writing things down, taking notes, recording things, setting reminders on their phone, stuff like that. Because we also have time management problems. A lot of times you'll hear this called time blindness because we have the ability to hyperfocus. People with ADHD are so good at focusing when they're interested in something. And we can focus for hours and hours and hours. It's kind of reads a little manic. It's not the same as mania by any means, but it's just really intense focus. And we are really good at that. But it means that we might lose track of time. Well, for me, things never take the amount of time I think they will. I tend to get ready really, really early for things because I'm so nervous about being late because I hate being late. So I'll get ready so early and then I'll have like 3 hours to kill because I'm ready too early. And then I'll end up being late because I end up getting into something during that time I'm waiting, and it's just a mess. So be compassionate to yourself and your friends with ADHD because we struggle with time. Frequent mood swings are another one. And oh gosh, this one hits for me because our moods change quickly, I think this is part of the reason I was incorrectly diagnosed with bipolar disorder at one point in my life, because I told my mental health providers that I was cycling through moods. And they heard that word and they said, "Oh, you must be bipolar." And I did some research and I read about bipolar disorder and I was like, this doesn't sound like me, because whereas a person with bipolar disorder experiences different cycles of emotion. They'll have a manic episode and then they'll have a depressive episode, and they'll kind of flip-flop between those two. Those episodes tend to last a long time, whereas I was, going through, an hour, and my mood would be different. I would, start out the day feeling great, and then all of a sudden I'd be depressed, and then I'd be hyper again, and then I'd be depressed, and then I'd be hyper again, and then I'd be depressed, over and over and over again, throughout the day, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times a day. And so I did some of my research and I said, I don't think this is bipolar disorder. I think this is something different. And, I found out later that that's kind of something that comes along with ADHD, is that rapid cycling through moods. Your mood can change on a dime, and we don't always understand why. It can be the most innocuous triggers that we don't even recognize. So that can make it really tough for people who don't have ADHD to understand, because one minute you're fine and then the next minute you're super depressed and you can't figure out why. One thing that makes it really tough for people with ADHD to function in school or in work is problems following through with instructions. A lot of people will think, again, assume you're lazy or you're being defiant or you just don't want to do the thing, when in reality, it's a problem with focus and attention. Follow through, for me anyway, is a huge issue. I start lots of things. I don't always finish all the things. And that can be a problem for a job, for example, where you have to finish the things. I think that this kind of ties in with procrastination. Procrastination is a huge one for me, because if I'm not interested and I don't want to do something, it feels literally impossible. I don't know how to express it in any other way. It feels impossible. It's not impossible, obviously. I eventually get most of the things I have to do done. But if I'm not interested, if that interest is not there, it feels like I'm incapable of doing the thing, which is such a frustrating feeling. And then, of course, as with most neurodivergent people, we struggle with coping with stress. Our brains function differently, and stress can really trigger some of our symptoms to feel worse. And so everyday stressors can feel overwhelming, and it can cause anxiety. I know that when I first went to that psychiatrist in my mid-20s, I was told that depression and anxiety can cause symptoms that look like ADHD, but also ADHD can cause depression and anxiety type symptoms. So it's sometimes hard to tell whether you've got one or the other or both. And so my doctor gave me the option and told me that we should start working on one, either the depression or the ADHD, and see if it impacted the other. So that's what we did. And it did turn out that, I have ADHD and a major depressive disorder. So yay me, lots and lots of things to deal with. But I want to point something out about all of these symptoms. Men and women can both have ADHD, and they do share a lot of the same symptoms, but symptoms do tend to manifest differently in men and women. And I want to call some of those out because, I think when people think of stereotypical ADHD, they really are thinking of the way it manifests in men, because men tend to manifest more externally, whereas women tend to manifest a little bit more internally. So it's harder to see the symptoms in women sometimes, which leads to them being underdiagnosed a lot of the time. And so in men and boys, the hyperactivity portion of ADHD is a lot more apparent. They're the ones who are quote unquote bouncing off the walls or, getting in trouble in school because they can't sit still. They are more likely to show external symptoms like acting out or aggression or, just being obstinate and disagreeable with authority figures. Impulsivity is going to be more pronounced, and that will lead to more obvious disruptions at work or school. And I do want to point out, I feel like a broken record on this podcast, but boys get more slack. There is that saying that boys will be boys, which sucks. We need to get rid of that saying ASAP. But boys get a lot more leeway, especially when it comes to neurodivergent symptoms. They get a lot of their symptoms simply written off as, oh, they're just being a boy. They're just a man. And so they don't always have to, confront those symptoms and address them and figure out a way to have a healthy relationship with their neurodivergence. In women and girls, inattention is a slightly more prominent feature than the hyperactivity. That might be daydreaming, seeming like they're not listening, or working below their potential. This is huge because it leads to, especially women, becoming perfectionists, And I don't know about you, but I resonate with this hardcore. I am a perfectionist, like over the top. My standards are unreachable. And for years, I thought that I was lazy. And finally, I took a step back and I said, well, hey, if I'm so lazy, why am I always working? Why can I never relax? Why do I never stop seeking to be productive? And then I realized, oh, I'm not lazy. I'm a perfectionist, and I have impossibly high standards that I will never be able to reach, leading to just continuous disappointment in myself. Literally the most impactful realization I've ever had. I'm not lazy, I'm a perfectionist, and I'm neurodivergent. And I hope that, maybe some of you are having that realization right now, but it's huge. It's huge. So yeah, women often develop coping mechanisms to mask their ADHD, which I feel like in general, women are better, maybe not better, but we need to mask more. This society requires us to mask more. And so we get good at it. And so we develop these coping mechanisms like being hyper organized to the point of like maybe being a little anal retentive about, organization. to compensate for the challenges that they face due to their ADHD. And women are more often diagnosed later in life because their symptoms tend to be less disruptive. And so they're less noticeable to parents, teachers, and even doctors. And especially, society expects women to be quiet and compliant. And that can lead to underdiagnosis in a big, big way. So that is just another example of ways that we really need to fucking dismantle this system, because it's not working for anybody, but it's especially not working for neurodivergent women. And because women have symptoms that are more internal, they tend to report higher levels of stress, depression, and anxiety. And they tend to have problems with self-esteem and identity due to these internal struggles not being visible to everybody else. So, you're feeling something, you're experiencing something, but nobody else can see it. So it's tough, because you're like, is there something wrong with me? Is there actually something going on? If nobody else sees it, is this real? Am I just lazy? Am I just, a bad student? Am I a bad employee? Is there something wrong with me? What's going on? Nobody else can see this. What's happening? And that can really suck. And that was definitely, that was an issue for me for a long time. And so I can't imagine I'm the only one. But I want to talk about chemistry for a minute. I want to talk about what's actually going on in the brain. I didn't know any of this until I started researching for this episode, because I wanted to know what the fuck is actually going on in my brain. Why do I have ADHD? And I can't tell you that. I don't know what causes ADHD. There is a lot of conflicting information on that, but there are some explanations for why symptoms of ADHD happen. And so it all comes down to our neurotransmitters. And neurotransmitters are basically like your brain's messengers. So it's how your brain sends messages to other parts of the brain, to other parts of the body. You think, almost unconsciously that you need to reach out and pick up something. Your brain is sending a message to your hand to pick up that item. And so there are differences in the way the neurotransmitters work in people with ADHD versus people who don't have it. And so the brain might not actually release enough of these neurotransmitters. So think of it as, just understaffing almost. You need 20 messengers to be able to deliver all the messages that your brain needs to function within a minute period. Those are examples. Do not take those numbers as literal fact, because I just made them up. But think of it as an understaffed school. You need 20 teachers, you've only got 10. You need 20 neurotransmitters, you've only got 10. And so things are not getting handled as efficiently as they could. And you also may be experiencing a problem with the receptors. So the mechanisms that are receiving those messages from the neurotransmitters may not be receiving them as well as they could. This affects the regions of the brain that are responsible for attention, impulse control, and executive function. Now, I want you to remember that phrase, executive function, because this is a huge issue for people with ADHD. We struggle with executive function, and that just means things like organization, planning, managing time. Think of it as your brain's CEO. Think about it as the boss at the top of a company. They are responsible for keeping everything on track. They're the executive. Your brain's executive is slacking off a bit and having a really hard time because he's understaffed, or they are understaffed. And so they don't have enough of these neurotransmitters. The receptors aren't picking up their side of the job. And so things are getting lost, and things are getting misplaced, and things are getting done not as efficiently as they could. And that's why you can't just try harder. You can't just try to focus or try to concentrate or try to stay still, because it's an actual brain issue. And that's not to say that it's a bad thing, because the thing that I want you to remember is, again, like I always say, you are not the problem. There is no changing this brain chemistry for the most part. We'll talk about stimulants in a minute, but there is no permanent alteration that you can make to get your neurotransmitters to, do what they need to do the way that society wants them to do it. And so if there's no way to change it, we may as well just accept it and stop forcing people who have these brain differences to try and pretend like they don't. That is what we need to change in society. Accept that everybody's brain is different. No one brain is better or worse than the other. And everybody just needs to be able to work, live, play, love, all the things in a way that works for their brain, because these differences are not going anywhere. So let's accept them and accept the people with them and let them live their lives in a way that's comfortable for them. Like, it seems so obvious to me, and I'm sure it seems obvious to you listening, but this is the change we need to make. And so all of those things obviously sound like a pain in the butt. Anybody who has ADHD knows that symptoms can be a pain in the ass, and they can make your life harder. Now, I believe that they're making your life harder because society wants you to behave like a neurotypical person, but there are downsides. There are downsides to having ADHD, like depression, like anxiety. But I think that a majority of our quote-unquote issues with neurodivergence and ADHD in particular come from the unrealistic expectations that society is setting on us. So if we can fix that, then we can use more of our energy to deal with the stuff that we actually don't like. So the epiphany that I had that actually led me to create this podcast was, I'm not the problem. I realized that my ADHD doesn't actually bother me. Now, I don't like feeling depressed or anxious. Those things suck. But for the most part, not being able to focus sometimes, needing to take longer on projects, needing clear written instructions, needing hard deadlines, but also needing flexibility on those hard deadlines, all of those things, they didn't bother me. They bothered everybody else. And that's when I realized I didn't give a shit anymore. I don't care if my boss doesn't like my ADHD, which I'm very fortunate that my boss is rockin' awesome and she doesn't give a shit about my ADHD and knows that I do good work when I'm allowed to work the way that I need to. But I want you to think about that for yourself. If you have ADHD or suspect you have ADHD, ask yourself, do I mind these symptoms? Do these symptoms bother me? Or do they only bother me because they're inconvenient for other people? Think about that, okay? But despite all of these potentially frustrating symptoms, people with ADHD have some killer strengths. We are oftentimes creative as all get out, super creative, such good problem solvers, especially because of that the need for novelty. People who experience ADHD, they tend to be really good problem solvers because they're always seeking newness. They're seeking excitement. They're seeking novelty. And that makes us great problem solvers. We also have a shit ton of energy with or without stimulants. We have a lot of mental energy, sometimes physical energy, and we can, if we're allowed to, use that energy for good. If you are a person with ADHD who is forced to sit at a desk for 9 hours a day, 5 days a week, do you feel like you're dying? Do you think that you could be using that energy in better ways? Exactly. We have so much energy, but we are not always allowed to use it in a way that is actually productive or effective or in a way that makes us happy. We're also really good at thinking outside the box. Now, the moment you've probably not been waiting for, or maybe you have been, I don't know. I want to talk about Adderall. So, Adderall is a stimulant. It's kind of like speed or caffeine or anything else that kind of speeds you up. That's why people who don't need Adderall feel really energized when they take it, because it is a amphetamine, which is crazy. We give people amphetamines. Anyway, I am not anti-medication. I just think we should be a little bit more diligent about how we're giving it out. But weirdly enough, where Adderall and similar stimulants can make neurotypical people feel really energized and maybe a little hyper, maybe a little manic. It actually has the opposite effect on people with ADHD. It can make us feel calm and focused. And this is just because it's giving our brain those resources that we're lacking. Remember how I was talking about the business that doesn't have enough workers? We don't have enough neurotransmitters. It's giving those neurotransmitters more resources so that they can be more effective. So that's why it can make us feel more focused and more calm, whereas a neurotypical person might feel a little cracked out on Adderall. So it boosts those neurotransmitter levels. It increases the level of dopamine and norepinephrine in the brain. These particular neurotransmitters are important for regulating mood, attention, alertness. And so for someone with ADHD, this can help correct the imbalance or insufficiency of these chemicals. So if you've got ADHD, you may not have enough dopamine or norepinephrine. And the stimulant, the Adderall, the Ritalin, what have you, is giving you more of that so that you have the resources that your brain needs to function. It can enhance activity in the areas of the brain that are involved in attention, decision making, and impulse control. So whereas those parts of your brain might be a little sleepy, normally you're giving it a stimulant to hype it up so it can do a better job of making decisions or controlling your impulses. This is super important in the prefrontal cortex, which is a portion of the brain that is involved in, again, those executive functions. So that is your corner office. Your prefrontal cortex is your corner office where your executive sits. So again, if we're going with the whole CEO of a business analogy, that is where your executive sits. And it also, stimulants can improve connectivity. So beyond just increasing the activity in specific brain regions, Adderall can improve the connectivity between different parts of the brain. So think of it as improving communication between the different offices in the business that is your brain. It can mean that you are better at absorbing information, integrating that information, and just lead to better brain function overall, which can help with organizing, prioritizing, and following through on projects. Okay, that's all well and good. But something happens when you take a stimulant. Stimulants are considered controlled substances. That's why you need to show your license, for example, when you pick it up from the pharmacy. That's why it's illegal to give it to somebody else who isn't prescribed it. Because it's a controlled substance. Because it's addictive. Not in the same way that maybe alcohol is addicting or cigarettes are addicting. It's not as much of the mental. You won't necessarily be sitting there thinking, oh man, I could really go for an Adderall right now. But your body, your brain, that's exactly what's happening. Your brain's like, hey, this is awesome. You gave me more resources. You gave me more workers. You gave me more, neurotransmitters. This is great. I love this. I want more. What? I can't have more? Why not? That's what's happening in your brain. So your brain gets hooked on these additional resources from stimulants, which is, again, not a good or bad thing, but it is, one reason why if you're going to go on stimulants, you want to make sure you understand what's going to happen. I am currently in the process of coming off Adderall, not because I don't want to be on it, not because I'm anti-medication, but I just wanted to check in with my body. I wanted to make sure that I actually needed it because I've made a lot of lifestyle changes. I've, started working out. I've started eating better. I've started doing other things to positively impact my mental health, and I just wanted to double check that I still needed it. It has been a fucking nightmare. And if someone had told me that coming off Adderall would be this difficult, this unpleasant, I may not have gone on the medication in the first place. And that's why I'm here, is I want to tell you all the information that I have so that you can decide, is it worth it for me? And if you are really struggling, stimulants can be a lifesaver. I remember when I first went on Adderall about 5 years ago, for the first maybe 3 or 4 days, I felt like a superhero. I felt like I could do anything. And I was on a child's dose and I felt amazing. And luckily, after a little while, that kind of leveled out and I just felt normal good, you know? But now that I'm taking this drug away from my brain, I'm experiencing depression, tiredness. You know, I'm always tired now. I just feel low all the time. And I don't know how long that's going to last. I don't know if it's going to be permanent. I don't remember if this is what my brain was like beforehand. But I just think that if anybody is going to make a decision to go on stimulants, they should have all the information. And a lot of people get prescribed stimulants by their primary care physician, which I think is fucking stupid. I don't think this is my opinion right here. Right now, my opinion, not fact, just an opinion. I don't think primary care physicians should be legally allowed to prescribe stimulants. I think that you should have to work with a mental health practitioner, because going to see your primary care physician for 20 minutes every couple months, or worse, maybe once or twice a year, is not enough to manage going on or coming off or making changes to a stimulant prescription. I think that only experts, people who are experts in stimulants, people who are experts in mental health, people who are experts in neurodivergence, I think those are the only people who should be allowed to prescribe these medications, because they're a big fucking deal. And if you grew up in the 90s like I did, you know that they were not taking stimulants seriously. And a lot of people still don't. You know, hey, got a problem? Think you have ADHD? Here, take a stimulant. No big deal. But guess what? It is a big fucking deal. It can be a life-changing medication. Life-changing. But it can also fuck you up. And I was on 60 milligrams of ADHD, which is fucking bonkers. It is very high. It's pretty much, I mean, it's not quite the cap. You know, you can go a little bit higher than that. And I was only on it for 5 years. And I had to keep going up and up and up and up just to feel normal. And that bugged me. I thought, what am I going to do when I get to the max, when I'm 40 and I've still got another 40, 50, 60 years to live? What happens if I'm on stimulants for 60 years? Nobody knows yet, because it hasn't happened yet, because they're not that old. And frankly, I didn't want to be the guinea pig. I don't want to be the guinea pig. I don't want to be the person that they find out when I'm 80, oh, actually, this was really bad for you. You shouldn't have been on it this long. Oh, we'll tell everybody else, but you're screwed. I didn't want to be that person. So my personal plan is to go off the Adderall, as hard as it is really hard, with the help of a mental health medication specialist. And I'm going to see how I feel for a bit. And if I have to go back on it, so be it. If I need it in order to function, so be it. But I'm not going to take a stimulant just because it makes me more convenient for society. That's fucked up. So let's talk a little bit about the science. What's actually happening when somebody is tapering off Adderall or a stimulant? Now, I want to make this clear. I'm talking about tapering off, not going cold turkey, which if you are on a stimulant, you know that this past year, due to the pandemic, there were a lot of shortages of Adderall and people couldn't get their medications. I went days, weeks, cold turkey, just completely no Adderall, and I thought I was dying. It was terrible. I can't imagine how a child would have dealt with that. But I realized that I didn't want to be in that position. I didn't want to not be able to take this medication that I was addicted to and feel like shit. So I decided to go off of it. And luckily, the shortages seem to have calmed down a bit and people seem to be getting their medications without a problem. But for a while, for almost half a year, there were a monthly. I was guaranteed every month to have 4 or 5 days where I just would have to go cold turkey, withdrawing from Adderall, which I can't imagine is healthy. And so, yeah, that was just part of my experience. But if you've been taking a stimulant, especially for a long time, you need to be super careful about coming off of it, and you should be working with a medical professional. I am going to go a step further and say that you should be working with a mental health specialist. But if you've only got access to a PCP, if you've only got access to a clinic, take what you can get. But if it's within your power, really try and work with a specialist. Because PCPs just, they don't have the time or resources or information to kind of handle these as effectively as they could. So obviously, once you start going off Adderall, you're going to notice your ADHD symptoms coming back. No duh. So inattention, hyperactivity, and impulsivity can return. They might come back worse for a little while. Theoretically, that will level out. But, at the beginning, they may feel way worse. You might be like, oh God, it made me worse. It didn't. Your brain is just adjusting. You may also have withdrawal symptoms. So that can include fatigue, depression, changes in your sleep, irritability, and mood swings. Because again, you just gave your brain artificial neurotransmitters. You gave your brain's employees more resources, and now you're taking those away. And your brain's going to be like, what the fuck? We needed those. Why are you doing that? It also might cause some cognitive effects. So you might not have as good memory. You might be more forgetful. You might not be able to concentrate very well. You might not be very good at decision making. I know that I've been getting overstimulated and overwhelmed a lot more frequently since I started tapering off Adderall. And it sucks. And you can also have like physical effects. So headaches, appetite changes, and body aches. And so you always want to make sure that if you're tapering off Adderall, you're doing so super gradually. I have not been doing it as gradually as I should probably be doing it because I'm not really happy with my doctor at the moment. So I've been avoiding talking to her and doing some stuff myself. Don't do what I'm doing. Work with your doctor, advocate for yourself, be a pain in the ass, but make your primary care physician or your med specialist or your psychiatrist, make them fucking care, because it's your life, it's their job, and you need to make a decision for your body and your health that you feel good about. And if that's going on stimulants, make sure you've got all the facts. If that's going off stimulants, make sure you're doing it in a way that doesn't make you feel like shit. Because if you feel like shit for 6 months while you're coming off Adderall, chances are you're going to go back on it just out of desperation. And if that's not what you want, then that's not a great way to go. So advocate for yourself. Be a pain in the ass. Tell your doctor what you want, why you want it, and make them listen. Because despite what it may feel like when you're in the doctor's office, you're the boss. Aside from some very limited situations, no one can make you take a medication you don't want to take if you're an adult. And if you want to take something or not take something, that's your decision. Your doctor's there to help you do that in the healthiest way possible. So, what did we learn today? We learned that ADHD comes with a whole lot of symptoms. And some of those symptoms can be more disruptive than others. But a lot of those symptoms maybe aren't that big of a deal if you just let people work and live in a way that jives with their brain. So figure out what you need and figure out how you can get it. Don't be afraid to ask for accommodations. If you need accommodation at work, if you need accommodation at school, don't be afraid to ask. Worst thing that can happen is they say no, and then you figure something else out. But ask. Always ask. And remember, ADHD shows up differently in men and women. Men is a little bit more external. Women is a little bit more internal. And along with ADHD can come depression, anxiety, that kind of stuff. And it's all about your brain chemistry. So again, your neurotransmitters, you don't have enough of them. So you are operating with half staff. It's not your fault that you can't focus. It's because you don't have enough people in your little brain office. And your CEO, your executive function, is struggling to make everything work with limited neurotransmitters. But People with ADHD also have some killer strengths like creativity, a shit ton of energy, and the ability to think outside the box. And if companies were leveraging these strengths instead of trying to fit us in neurotypical boxes, they might be way better off than they are. And of course, we talked about stimulants, which are basically artificial neurotransmitters. So you're giving your brain more resources, but it can also be addicting. So you want to really think about what you want from your life and who you're making changes for before you go on stimulants, because we don't know what happens if you take stimulants your entire life. We don't know what happens if you take the highest dose of stimulant available for 50 years. We don't know what happens. So proceed with caution. Make the decision that's right for you, not for everybody else. And if you are trying to come off of a stimulant like Adderall, work with a specialist if at all possible. All right, I'm going to get off my soapbox now. I hope you loved this episode because I loved making it. And if you did, go ahead and screenshot it and share it on social media. I would love you forever. Tag me. We're at Brainbow Connection Pod on Instagram. And I hope to see you next time because our next episode is super dope. It is going to be it's a collaboration episode with another podcast. So I'm really excited for you to hear that one. But until next time, this is Brainbow Connection. And remember, you are not the problem.
Positivity is not toxic.